Imagine swimming through a completely flooded cave in total darkness when you suddenly realize your diving partner behind you has stopped moving. You turn around. He's unconscious, sinking, and you're faced with an impossible choice. Try to save him and likely die yourself, or leave him behind and escape alone. This is exactly what happened in February 2014, when 4 experienced Finnish cave divers entered Norway's Plura Cave. On February 6, 2014, Patrick Grunqvist, Kai Kankkonen, Jari Huotarinen, and Jari Uusimäki gathered at the entrance to Plura Cave in northern Norway. These weren't amateur divers. They were among Finland's most experienced cave diving specialists, with hundreds of dives between them. They'd explored some of the most challenging underwater cave systems in Europe, and today's dive was supposed to be routine. But deep inside Plura's flooded passages, something would go catastrophically wrong with their breathing equipment, and the 2 survivors would face a decision that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Plura Cave is located in the Rana region of northern Norway, and it's notorious among cave divers for its extreme difficulty. The cave system contains multiple sumps, sections of passage that are completely flooded with no air pockets. To navigate through Plura, divers must swim through underwater tunnels in near-freezing water, often in zero visibility conditions, with no possibility of surfacing until they reach the next air-filled chamber. The 4 Finnish divers were planning to traverse the cave system from one entrance to another, a route that required passing through several sumps. This type of dive is called a through trip, and it's considered one of the most challenging forms of cave diving. The divers would be underwater for extended periods, relying entirely on their equipment and training to survive. All 4 divers were using rebreathers, which are advanced breathing systems that recycle exhaled air by removing carbon dioxide and adding oxygen. Rebreathers are preferred for long, deep dives because they're more efficient than traditional scuba tanks. But they're also complex machines with multiple components that can fail. And when they fail in a flooded cave, divers have only seconds to react before losing consciousness. The team entered the cave in the morning, with Patrick and Kai diving as one pair, and the 2 Jaris diving as the second pair. The plan was for both teams to navigate through the sumps, meeting at various points along the route. Everything went smoothly through the first sections of the cave, but in the 3rd sump, approximately 130 meters into the underwater passage, something went terribly wrong. Patrick and Kai were in the lead. They'd successfully navigated through the narrow, flooded tunnel and surfaced in an air-filled chamber on the other side. They waited for the 2 Jaris to appear behind them. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. The 2 Jaris should have emerged by now. The dive through that section only took about 10 minutes. Patrick and Kai looked at each other, and they both knew something had gone wrong. They made the decision to go back into the water to search for their friends. Entering the sump again, swimming back against the route they'd just completed, Patrick and Kai descended back into the flooded passage. The water was murky. Visibility was nearly zero. They pulled themselves along the guideline that all cave divers use to navigate in these conditions. And then, in the darkness, Patrick's light found something, a body, motionless in the water. It was Jari Huotarinen. He was unconscious, his rebreather mouthpiece still in place, but he wasn't breathing. Patrick grabbed him and immediately began trying to ascend, attempting to bring Jari back to the air-filled chamber. But Jari was in full diving gear. He was heavy, the passage was narrow, and Patrick was running out of time and air himself. He struggled with Jari's body, trying desperately to pull him through the tight sections of the cave. But it was impossible. The angles were too tight. Jari's body kept getting wedged against the cave walls. And that's when Patrick faced the most horrific decision any diver can face. If he continued trying to recover Jari's body, he would run out of air. He would die in this flooded passage. And so would Kai, who was somewhere in the darkness nearby, also searching. Patrick made the agonizing choice. He let go of Jari's body, and he turned around and swam for his life. When Patrick surfaced back in the chamber, he found Kai, who had also been searching. Neither had found Jari Usimaki, the second diver. Both men were shaking, traumatized, and faced with a new nightmare. They were only halfway through the cave system. To escape, they still had to navigate through several more flooded sumps, and they had to do it knowing that their friends' bodies were somewhere in the darkness behind them. The two survivors made the decision to continue forward. There was no way to go back the way they'd entered. The only route to safety was through the remaining sumps ahead of them. Patrick and Kai gathered themselves, checked their equipment, and dove back into the cold water. The psychological horror of continuing the dive after what they'd just experienced was almost unimaginable. Every meter they swam, they knew they were leaving their friends behind. Every moment in the darkness, they wondered if their own rebreathers would fail. But they kept moving, chamber by chamber, sump by sump, until finally they reached the far entrance of Plura Cave, the anxiety continuing throughout. When they emerged and alerted authorities, a massive recovery operation began. But recovering bodies from Plura Cave would prove to be nearly as dangerous as the original dive. The cave system's complexity and the conditions that had killed the two Jaris made any recovery attempt extremely risky. Expert cave divers from Norway and other countries volunteered to assist, but it took days of planning and preparation. Recovery divers had to navigate the same flooded passages, locate the bodies in zero visibility conditions, and then somehow maneuver them through the narrow restrictions back to an accessible location. During the recovery operation, the exact cause of the deaths became clear. Both Jaris had experienced rebreather malfunctions. The specific failure was related to the oxygen supply in their rebreather units. When the oxygen level drops too low, a condition called hypoxia sets in. Hypoxia causes confusion, poor judgment, and eventually unconsciousness. And it happens fast. A diver can go from feeling fine to blacking out in less than a minute. Jari Huotarinen had likely lost consciousness first. Jari Usimaki, swimming behind him, probably tried to help his friend when he saw him in distress. But before he could do anything, his own rebreather failed as well. Both men had lost consciousness in the flooded passage, and both had drowned. The bodies of both Jaris were eventually recovered, but the operation took over a week and involved some of the world's most experienced cave diving rescue specialists. The recovery divers described the conditions as some of the worst they'd ever encountered. The Plura Cave disaster sent shockwaves through the international cave diving community. These weren't inexperienced divers making rookie mistakes. These were experts with years of training and hundreds of successful dives. They had the best equipment, they followed proper procedures, and they still died. The incident led to extensive investigations into rebreather safety and cave diving protocols. Manufacturers examined the specific units that had failed. Diving organizations reviewed training standards. But ultimately, the tragedy highlighted a brutal truth that every cave diver knows. Even with perfect equipment and perfect training, flooded caves remain one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Patrick Grönqvist and Kai Kenkinen survived, but they were left with the trauma of that day. They'd watched their friends die. They'd been forced to leave their bodies behind in the darkness, and they'd had to continue diving through flooded passages, not knowing if they would survive either. But the Plura tragedy wasn't the only time a diver's final moments would be captured in horrifying detail. Just 6 years earlier, in Egypt's Blue Hole, a 22-year-old Russian diver named Yuri Lipsky descended into what's known as the Diver's Cemetery, with a camera mounted to his helmet. What that camera recorded would become one of the most disturbing pieces of footage in diving history. As Yuri descended deeper and deeper, past the point of no return, the camera captured every moment of his descent into death. His frantic attempts to inflate his buoyancy device, his confusion as nitrogen narcosis set in, and his final moments as he sank to the bottom, 300 feet down, unable to save himself. The footage would later be recovered, showing the world exactly what it looks like when a dive goes catastrophically wrong. But that's a story for the next video. For now, that's all. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you have a story suggestion, feel free to write it in the comments.